in order to use R, we need two pieces of software, the base R and also the RStudio programming interface. And together, these two pieces of software comprise of a computational environment. So R is not a formal programming language. It is just an interactive data object computation environment. And programming in R is actually a process that defines or updates data objects with expressions. So R is not an official programming language. It is an interactive computation environment. In this environment, we can define and update data objects. So programming in R is actually just a process that defines or updates data objects with expressions. RStudio is an interactive computation environment. When you get into RStudio, you will see 4 panels. And in the lower left panel is what we call console. Now every expression that you type into this area, for example, like 3 plus 5 and divided by 2, for example. Now every expression, like this mathematical expression, that you type into this console area will be evaluated interactively, and the output will be shown to you immediately. That's what we mean by interactive. So we can treat this console area as a calculator that evaluates every expression that you type in and return the result to you immediately. That's what we mean by interactive computation. Besides the simple numbers and the mathematical operators, actually in R we can define our own data objects. For example, we can define the object X with a vector of 0.5, 0.3, and 0.2. Now in this way, we will define the data object here. The upper right panel is sometimes referred as the object panel, where every object defined by us, every data object that we defined will be listed here. For example, this X is defined as the numeric vector of length 3. After defining data objects, we can use them in the expression. For example, we want to do X times 100 and then divided by 5. See, we can use a data object that we define in the expression, and again, the R will evaluate the expression and tell us the result. Well, actually, if we put an expression to the right-hand side of the equal signs, we can actually assign the value of this expression to another data object. For example, in this way, we will create another data object, Y, and we can update the value of Y by doing something like Y equal to Y plus X. See, now this is what we mean by programming, right? By programming, we mean we define data object or update data object, an expression. That's what we mean by programming. By programming, we mean a process that we define or update the value of data objects by expressions. Now, instead of executing one line of code at a time, sometimes it would be desirable to write several lines of code and execute them together. On the upper left of RStudio is its coding area, and the code that you type in this area will not be executed immediately. It's like a text editor, so you can modify the code. You can set the code into a file so you can execute them repeatedly. Sometimes the logic of business analytics is very lengthy, so it would be desirable to write the code and set the code into a file so you can modify or execute them repeatedly. As an example, these 3 lines of code will evaluate the expected value of an event of 3 different outcomes. The first 2 lines of code, we defined the probability and the payoff of each of these 3 outcomes as 2 data objects, right? And then in the third line, we will use this expression to evaluate the expected value. That is how it works, right? So if we run these 3 lines of code, we will have the expected value of these uncertain events. And sometimes later, if something change, right? For example, if the probability change, if the payoff change, right? Now we simply need to do some slight modification on the code and run the code again. Then see, you get the expected value again. And this is basically how we do programming in R and why we want to do programming in R, right? First of all, we can reflect our business logic by a program, right? By a process that defines the data object and update its value with a sequence of code, right? And by running this program, it will help us predict the outcome of our business, right? And when the environment change, we simply need to change our code and rerun the code, then we can see the prediction again. And basically, this is what we mean by business analytics and why we want to do it at all.